Now that everybody is charged up again with coffee, we will move right along and we will move into radio astronomy. Kevin Dale will talk to us about the graphics and hardware accelerated real-time processing pipeline for radio astronomy. Kevin?
I am Kevin Dale. I'm a grad student in computer science, actually, at Harvard. And the work that I'll be talking about today was done at the Initiative for Innovative Computing at Harvard in collaboration with folks at the Center for Astrophysics and NVIDIA Research. The goal of the project is to evaluate the benefit of using GPU co-processors for a real-time processing pipeline. Did that go away? For radio astronomy. The telescope of interest here is one of two of the Murchison Wide Field Array project. Okay, that's that, shadows. I imagine a lot of you are already familiar with the MWA project, but for those that aren't, I'll spend a couple slides talking about that and give a very, very brief overview. And I'll spend the majority of the talk talking about a single GPU implementation that we did of the most computationally intensive components of the real-time processing pipeline for MWA. The goal of the MWA, again, is to meet these real-time processing requirements for a certain amount of data. So it's going to require, at least for a GPU-based implementation, lots of cards, multiple CPUs. So based on benchmarks from the single GPU implementation, we can make some arguments about how things will scale to a cluster for a traditional CPU-only cluster and one with GPU co-processors. We'll also talk a little bit about how those clusters will compare in terms of cost and power consumption. So the MWA project, it's a collaborative effort amongst a number of universities and organizations, and it calls for construction of two synthesis radio telescopes in the Australian outback in the Murchison Shire, a very remote location pictured here and shown on the map. And I think the plan is to have both of these instruments operational by the end of 2008. And sort of the two overarching themes of the project, one is to provide instruments with extremely large fields of view for frequencies below 1.6 gigahertz. And they plan to accomplish this not by large diameter expensive reflectors, but by combining many cheap small dipole antennas spread across a 1.5 kilometer area backed by a compute cluster. So for example, there's no electromechanical steering mechanism in these antennas. Definitely. There are no electromechanical steering mechanisms in the antennas. Steering is done on the back end via some analog signal processing and in software. And also important to note, the data center itself will be co-located with the tile array in the Australian outback. So both will be driven by generators, so that makes the issue of power consumption that much more important. And there's, again, lots of interesting things going on with the MWA, particularly their science goals that I'm not going to talk about here, but two of my collaborators, Randall Waith and Daniel Mitchell, are here today, and they have a poster, and I encourage everybody to check out the poster for more information on the MWA project. Here's a block diagram of the RTS, the real-time real-time processing pipeline for the MWA. I'm only going to spend a moment on the slide here, but we'll come back to it in later slides. I want to point out that a couple things. One, this main data path in brown is parallel by frequency. We have visibility data generated by an FPGA correlator, not shown, streaming into the RTS. And we're processing 1,000 frequency channels. So we have a lot of data parallelism there, and the operations within each block themselves are very data parallel across either tile or visibility or baseline. It's, for the most part, boils down to lots of linear algebra on large vectors of size about 130,000 entries. We do some scatter data interpolation and a 2D FFT. So again, lots of available data parallelism, but we also have really big data. The main upstream bandwidth here is 1.7 gigabytes a second, and the downstream bandwidth out past here is more than that. It's about 10 gigabytes a second, depending on the output image resolution. So not only do we have lots of available data parallelism, but we're also going to stress the PCIe bus if we're going to try to incorporate GPUs into the pipeline. So at the onset of the project this summer, we did some benchmarks of isolated operations, these linear algebra on large vectors, outer products, non-uniform scales, FFTs, scatter data interpolation, and got significant speedups. But again, how this will translate into a speedup across the entire pipeline really can't be inferred from these isolated benchmarks. So we implemented the most computationally intensive components of the pipeline on a single GPU. Now it's been designed to scale to multiple GPUs, but we've only tested it across 2 cards. Real quick, here's the test platform. We have 2 NVIDIA Quadro FX 5600 cards. The majority of the code is written in CUDA. There is one portion of the pipeline that was written in OpenGL. Lets us actually leverage the rasterizer, which has lots of compute bandwidth there for additional performance. So the 2 major components that we implemented, array calibration and image formation. 2 parts of array calibration are calibrating the instruments themselves and coming up with a model for the ionosphere. The ionosphere causes refraction, and this refractive effect varies across the sky with direction. The same thing goes for the gain response of the individual tiles. It's also directional dependent. And not only that, they vary across time. So we essentially loop across the calibrator measurement loop every 8 seconds. And we have a catalog of known sources, and we calibrate on one known source at a time to compute some refractive offset and gains for all the tiles in that direction. And we want to loop over as many known sources as possible during that interval to maintain, as precise of a model of the ionosphere and the tile beam as we can. The second part of the pipeline we focused on is image formation. Perform gridding. So we're essentially discretizing this sparse, irregularly sampled visibility data on a irregular grid so that we can efficiently do an inverse Fourier transform with an FFT. So back to this picture. Again, the RTS. This is the part that we are focused on. We have the calibrator measurement loop and the most important stages of image formation here. Zoomed in on that again. So the calibrator measurement loop operates on average visibility data. So imagine that the entire RTS is operating across many nodes in a cluster, where each node is responsible for processing some subset of those 1,000 frequencies. So here we average the visibility data. And for each source in our catalog, we're going to compute our ionospheric offset, compute tile gains for all the tiles, and then loop. And we want to do this as many times as possible to maintain as fresh and as up-to-date of a model of the ionosphere and the tile beam as we can. And we operate on full resolution data for image formation. So we grid, perform an inverse FFT, and I actually didn't mention, but we also want to remove the effects of the ionosphere once we come up with our dirty images of the sky. Here are some relative performance numbers. The bars in green are for those stages in image formation, and those in yellow for the calibrator measurement loop. And for all except for gridding, we're really comparing apples to apples here. Started off with the reference double precision implementation. Implemented it on the CPU in single precision, did some optimizations just so I had a reasonable baseline for performance comparisons. And then compared that with the GPU implementation of these stages. So, but gridding, there is some double precision arithmetic, but not in the innermost loops. And I know it has a significantly larger speed up here than the others do. And it's not, I'd like haven't actually tested it, but I'd like to say that I don't really think it's because of the sparse use of double precision. I think it's, again, because we made efficient use of the rasterization hardware and the shader hardware, or the parallel pipelines on the NVIDIA cards. And then for most of the modules in the CML, about, on average, I guess, 8x speed up. But again, these are just individual modules.
So imaging is your FFT?
It's an FFT, yeah, 2D FFT over a 1600 by 1600 image. And there's some shifting before and after, and some marshalling before and after. So the actual, what is this, 19x? The actual 2D FFT over that grid size was roughly about 11x speed up. We got some speed up in the shift to move the zero center to the proper corner of the array, and the marshalling. So there was a little bit of extra speed up there. 2 dirty images generated from the GPU implementation and then the reference double precision implementation. There's actually up to 1 pixel error in the position of some of these sources between the two, and some additional noise. But again, that's really due to the difference between double precision and single precision, and then differences between the actual code that gets executed in both implementations.
Is that a serious problem at that level?
That's certainly for the MWA guys to decide, but I've since talked to them about it, and the general consensus is I think that single precision is fine for most of the pipeline, so it's not a problem.
Dynamic range?
What about
Dynamic range? Is there any difference?
between the two? In these images, of course, no, because they're both mapped to single precision. I guess it would make sense that there is a little bit additional dynamic range if you maintain double precision throughout the pipeline. But I'm not really sure about the dynamic range of the input data, if that's really the determinant, or if we actually clamp it somehow by switching to single precision. My guess is that the limiting factor there is the input data, so there isn't a problem. But again, I would actually ask Randall or Mitch about that to be sure.
Actually, this might be just where I'm sitting, but I can't see some of the standard sources in the GPU image as opposed to reference image.
Right, source or possibly noise. Yeah. When I say approximate pixel error between the sources, I'm talking about the significantly stronger sources in red, but definitely some of the weaker points. Yes, sir. Okay. All right. So again, to meet these real-time constraints, we'll need to have multiple cards, multiple GPUs, CPU implementation, multiple CPUs. So we did some analysis based on the benchmarks from the single precision implementation to see how things will scale to a cluster for both a traditional CPU-only cluster and one equipped with GPUs. And this is sort of a soft, scaled-down version of the entire pipeline. We still have 1,000 frequency channels, calibrating on 65 sources every 8 seconds, and we only have 8-second resolution visibility data instead of 2-second resolution. That's just what we had to test on, but I think the comparisons are still legitimate, and we'll scale once we have 2-second resolution data. And this does include stress on the PCIe bus, and essentially time not spent transferring data is split equally between calibrating and image generation. And to sort of drive home the point and make approximations based on power and cost, we need to have an actual platform to compare. So we're looking at the NVIDIA Tesla S870, which has 4 GPUs in one housing. We're assuming that it's a very conservative estimate that that's equivalent to at least 4 Quadro FX 5600 cards that share a single PCIe bus. And the server, it's not necessarily ideal or even suitable in terms of supporting PCIe and other things, but it does have the same processor that we use in our tests. And probably more important, IBM has this handy tool for estimating total power consumption for a given configuration that includes disk, memory subsystem, CPU. So that's why we selected this for the comparison. We can get 20 frequencies on a GPU, and the GPU-based cluster requires this hardware right here, CPU, this hardware. And again, this is a scaled-down version of the pipeline, and there's actually one element that's missing that would push this to the point that even on one dual-core CPU, we couldn't fit one frequency. But right now, we're assuming that we can process one frequency on one dual-core CPU, pipelining the calibration on one core and image formation on the other core. But again, that's just barely fits in there. So here we see those benefits in terms of cost and power consumption. And again, this order of magnitude improvement in flops doesn't always translate to the same sorts of benefits in overall performance or in cost or in power, but it actually does here. We have significantly better performance, but for holding performance constant, the cost of the GPU-based cluster is going to be significantly less than CPU-based cluster. And we see the same order of magnitude improvement for power consumption. So yeah, a few closing notes. It looks like GPUs are a very promising platform for the RTS. I know the MWA team is evaluating a couple other platforms, but I think right now GPUs are the current leader. And we saw actually on the last slide that GPUs have an advantage in performance and also in power efficiency and cost relative to performance. So that's all I have. Thanks for your attention, and I'll be glad to answer any questions if we have time.
We have time for a couple questions, Stephen.
So the software that you used, was that something off the shelf like AstroGPU? And then the question on that is, did you CUDA all yourself, or did you have some middleware that you would have to develop or found to develop?
This is for the GPU code?
Yes, right.
So yeah, I used CU Blast, CU FFT, and then
So it was all hand
code that I wrote. Yes, sir.
Middleware. And what was the reference-based software? Was it HP Plus or Trees or?
For the CPU implementation, it was custom code written by the MWA team. I think they used GNU's LAPACK and BLAS packages.
For the imaging.
No, it was custom software. Yeah.
So how different was, in the end, your code, your algorithm versus the custom software that MWA wrote? So what I'm trying to get a feeling of is, does it take a computer scientist to go from the CPU algorithm to a GPU algorithm?
No, I don't think so. I think with CUDA, it's particularly easy to write code that works and that gives you a noticeable speed up. I think to do that final bit of tweaking, it does require some low-level tuning to make advantage of shared memory and to make sure you're, handling bank conflicts.
In terms of algorithms, so you did not need to invent an entirely new algorithm for this particular problem, or did you?
I'd say roughly half of the code is a fairly straightforward port from C to CPU to CUDA. The other half is maybe only barely resembles the original code. Does that answer the question?
I'm afraid you have to stop here to make time for the next speaker. Let us thank Kevin again.